So in terms of the future, when it comes to science, misinformation is something that we have to be very concerned about. And this, we need the press to help scientists around the world and physicians around the world in this area, because if you aren't aware, there's talks in pretty much every country around the world about the potential to criminalize misinformation. Fine scientists and physicians, fire scientists and physicians if they provide misinformation. This has to be of concern to the media, because you have to start asking yourselves, if that's the case, who are going to be the arbiters of truth if it's not going to be scientists who provide primary data? So that's a key thing you have to watch out for.
That the WHO has the ability to say what is disinformation. And when anybody says to you that the science is settled on any issue, I suggest that this House would smell a rat straight away, because science is never settled. There is always open for modification, for new things to be discovered, theses to be refined. And what the WHO is saying is that the WHO will be the arbiter of what the science is. And that cannot be right. It's a bit like someone saying the market's changed. Well, in my experience, it never has. So that is a huge grab of power. And the two instruments, the pandemic treaty and the amendments to the international health regulations, are progressing in parallel. And for those who, I just really worry whether colleagues in this have actually read the treaty, because clearly, you know, when you take out the words "not binding" as an amendment, it then becomes binding. You know, these are binding treaties. If we do nothing, these treaties are binding. They're legally binding across all the nations. They're bringing in an idea called One Health. So, and this then extends the ability of the Director General of the WHO to call a public health emergency of international concern, which incidentally is abbreviated to FAKE. FAKE. So, and it says that he can bring it in on the suspicion, the risk of an international incident. It doesn't even have to be about a pathogen that's affecting humans. It can affect animals. He's taking the powers because it could be because of the environment or an increase in the levels of CO2. I suggest that honourable and right honourable members read the treaty. It's a massive extension of powers. And at the drop of a hat, one man, Mr. Tedros, can call for massive powers to the WHO. And not only will he call when he takes the powers, he will decide when the pandemic or the emergency is over, and when he'll possibly give us the powers back to this House, where elected representatives are supposed to be representing the interests of our constituents. Well, that will all be suspended. And I would, while we're talking about Mr. Tedros, I mean, I would just remind the House that this gentleman who will be deciding the fate of the world, it'll be within his gift to call these emergencies. The conduct of the WHO in the recent Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where 83 individuals who are working for the WHO sexually abused local women, and including the sexual assault of a 13-year-old girl. And it was all covered up, Mr. Sharma. And in a leaked document from the WHO, which would have been in front of Mr. Tedros's committee, a confidential UN report submitted to the WHO last month concluded that the manager's handling of the case didn't violate WHO sexual exploitation policies because the woman concerned was not a beneficiary of WHO aid since she didn't receive any humanitarian support. That is completely unacceptable. If that's the rules of an organisation that will be deciding whether my constituents are locked down for 6 months, 3 months, and whether they can go and see their granny, I don't think it's acceptable. Also, these new treaties, they compress the time for governments of mandatory reporting lines of 72 hours from when a risk to public health has to be reported to the WHO, and he'll make a decision. This is far too little time for any research, any meaningful research to be done as to what the real risk is, and it will lead to lots of potential for false alarms and unnecessary disruption. These are huge powers. that these two instruments would seek to take away from this Parliament and every other Parliament around the world. And they need to be considered very, very strongly. Sticking your head in the sand isn't going to do. It won't do for my constituents. You know, if we learn anything from the vote we had in 2016, is that people in this country, they do not want to be ruled by unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats. And there's no one more unaccountable and unelected of people in the WHO who don't pay tax, and they and their families have immunity from prosecution because they've got diplomatic immunity. They're also under the huge financial interests of whoever wishes to fund them. So many experts are now saying that these two instruments would fundamentally reset the relationship between citizens and sovereign states, not in this country, but also around the whole world. Unelected, unaccountable, top-down, supranational body, the WHO. What these treaties will do will empower that Director General to impose sweeping, legally binding, they are legally binding directions on member states. They'll be forced, they have the power then to force companies in this country or any other country to manufacture certain medical treatments and to export them to other countries and be told to do it. It'll have the power to shut down any business in this country, regardless of what the local people think or even this Parliament thinks. It takes away all the protections that being in a democracy offers. It actually takes away Article 3 in the original Constitution, which is the respect of human right and dignity. That goes and is replaced by a bland statement saying that there will be equity. And equity means whatever it means. It means that everyone's going to be treated equally. It also means that one solution to any international problem around the world. And that leads to an all-or-nothing situation, Mr. Sharma, where if the WHO got it right, and if we want to go in, if I have the time, I'll go into everything they got wrong in the last pandemic. If they get it right, okay, maybe okay. But if they get it wrong, that's the whole of humanity has got it wrong. There's no competition, and if there was only one car manufacturer, only one solution, I'm not sure it would be the best car that we could ever have. I think competition between nations for solutions is a good thing. I have grave concerns over these two instruments.
The powers for the WHO extend potentially to ordering border closures on countries, travel restrictions, tracing of contacts, refusal of entry, forced quarantining, medical examinations, including requirements for proof of vaccination, and even the forced medication of individuals. And it's not just when there is indeed a pandemic already declared that these powers might be invoked, it's when there is simply the potential for such an emergency that the WHO claims this power.
And of course, they throw misinformation bit in there too. Here's their sort of summary of all the things they want to do. Look at E, they want to counter misinformation and disinformation. That information bit is important because the pandemic powers, the document that we can opt into that we've been talking about, they've defined a risk now, a new risk. We talked about this before. In the draft that we talked about in February, it said infodemic defined as ... So we never knew exactly how they were going to define infodemic. We just knew that they wanted to. Now they have. Take a look. I just highlighted it as how they're defining an infodemic. They're saying it's a new health threat. With this new information ecosystem has generated a new health threat called an infodemic. It is the overabundance of information, accurate or not. Let's all digest that for a second, because you can have an overabundance of truth, you guys, and that's bad for you. We can see how they have been working, especially during the pandemic. They didn't have checks on their power. They didn't have any, we weren't given any opportunity to give feedback. We weren't given any opportunity to vote. They approve who they want. In fact, they promote people who have been good soldiers of COVIDism. We spoke about the guy who was able to provide edits to the Nature journal that disproved the COVID lab leak. He was promoted inside the World Health Organization, and he worked with Dr. Fauci, and he basically wrote in foregone conclusions to a scientific paper about how COVID did not come from a lab, which was later refuted by military doctors. So we see this behavior. I don't think we're going to see like real democracy functioning inside of this. It's not possible that way.
It's not possible. When they're, as Philip pointed out earlier, when they're unaccountable, it's not possible. And so that's why you write a constitution. So you have checks and balances. You have a Supreme Court. You have a bicameral government that keeps each other in check.
And this is how you blow up a constitution, is you just take it and usurp it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I would like to say some words on the Global Compact on Migration. On the 10th and 11th of December, there will be an international congress in Marrakesh, Morocco, with regard to this Global Compact on Migration. And the participating countries are set to sign this agreement. And although this joint agreement isn't binding, it's still meant to be the legal framework on which the participating countries commit themselves to build new legislation. And one basic element of this new agreement is the extension of the definition of hate speech. The agreement wants to criminalize migration speech. Criticism of migration will become a criminal offense. And media outlets, and that also concerns you, that give room to criticism of migration can be shut down.
And many people have spoken tonight about, the influence of the World Economic Forum. And I don't know if you've ever seen, but there is a bit where Klaus Schwab says, we've infiltrated every government around the world. Do you think that there is a possibility that has trickled down into unelected international bureaucrats influencing more local politics?
They don't influence me. And I hope not, because that's not what democracy is about.
Communication is a big part of the battle here. And why is it so important? It's important because they've put these censorship bills forward, right? The government wants to be able to control what you see. They don't want people to have freedom of speech. And that's why part of fighting back is looking for different ways to communicate. And I'm trying to do that as a member of parliament for you. I'm furious. I cannot believe that in Canada, a G7 country, a democracy, we have a government that has put forward bills that are censoring Canadians' speech. It's something, we've just been fighting so hard, and we'll continue to fight. We will fight over this and against this in the next federal election. But this is the reality right now. Right now, Facebook is saying, yeah, we're banning the news. There's that censorship bill. Okay, here we go. This is the headline that's coming out today. It's in the Canadian press. Trudeau shows no interest in compromising with Meta or Google over online news bill. Meta has said that it is prepared to permanently end access to news content in Canada if the legislation passes. This is Bill C-18. So as you heard on this channel this week, the Facebook, its parent company Meta, they've already started banning news in Canada.
President Joe Biden to announce a disinformation board to crack down on disinformation.
The objective of the board is to prevent disinformation and misinformation from traveling around the country in a range of communities.
This has rightly been compared to the Ministry for Truth that Hitler, Stalin, and other dictators had. It completely ignores the reality of the true nature of the disinformation we've seen in recent years. The topics that the tech giants and the Democrats claimed were disinformation were actually accurate and factual.